we have two plugins, InterState and InterState Bridge. But before we get into that, let's have a look at InterState itself. InterState is a plugin host made up of 3 racks, each rack with 8 slots that can load VST3 and AU plugins. Each rack has a dry-wet mixer and can be run in serial, parallel, multiband, or any combination of the above. The UI is focus driven to give you deep controls with a simple layout. Clicking on the main tab will give you all the controls for the main context. Here we have input gain with input phase, widen and pan, with the same set of controls over the output volume. And in the visualizer we can see the input and output traces. Clicking on a rack tab will put that rack in focus. And each rack has its own dedicated mixer and visualizer, as do each of the 8 slots within each rack. And each one of those contexts has 8 macro dials. Here we have slot A1 in focus. Let's engage the AutoMap. Open up the plugin on this slot and dial in our settings to taste using the beat synced oscilloscope so we can see how the compressor is affecting the kick drum in real time. And when we close the plugin, AutoMap will keep a record of which dials you've used, map them to macro 1 to 8, with dial 1 being your most used parameter, dial 2 your second most used parameter, and so on and so forth. But macro dials can of course be mapped to as many parameters as you like. Here we have a single dial mapped to 6 different parameters within Pro Q4. EQ plugins have quite a wide range, and this is where our custom min-max component comes in. Here you can see our start point is 545 Hz and our end point 207 Hz. So let's click on curves and set range, and then our min-max component will adapt to that range. Let's engage modulation by clicking on the mod button, and this will bring up an overlay in the visualizer over the top of the oscilloscope. Let's set the subdivision to a quarter note. And now we've turned our EQ into an LFO driven creative filter. But let's take it one step further. Let's map the same macro dial to the input drive and output volume of this tape plugin. We'll set the range and invert the curves for input and output. We'll then set a 3x3 grid, and we can add nodes to our curve with a left click and hold down Shift and drag to snap the nodes to the grid. And this will give our saturation a triplet vibrato kind of feel. Let's give this sound a sidechain pumping effect by mapping the same macro dial to the output volume of this slot, and experimenting with the curve to give us different styles and effects. Now of course this is just a simple LFO curve, but our modulator can be as in-depth as you want it to be. You You can also hold down Shift and drag left to right to create steps. When you map a macro dial to a discrete parameter, it will automatically detect that, and you will get a stepped macro dial. And now when you engage the modulation, you get a step sequencer. We can add and remove steps. The steps will show the parameter's name. And shift and drag to snap to the grid. The InterState Bridge is an instrument plugin that doesn't emit any sound, but can communicate with all instances of InterState in your project. That means we can control and automate as many macro dials as we want, map to as many plugins as we like, and you can of course map this to a controller with near zero latency. We've also got direct access to each instance of InterState in our project. If InterState is a hub for your plugins, the InterState Bridge is a hub for your interstates. MIDI mapping uses the same context-focused philosophy as the user interface. So the 8 dials on our controller will control whichever 8 dials are in focus. And if I click the Rack B tab, now we're controlling all the macro dials in Rack B. And of course the same goes for each of our slots. And because the InterState Bridge is an instrument, we can also use MIDI nodes to navigate and open and close the hosted plugins. And as well as the macro dials, we also have access to whichever mixer is in focus. So even though this controller only has 2 sliders and 2 dials, we can very quickly and easily control up to 32 mixers. And all of this can be done from the bridge without even having the InterState editor windows open. Each slot and each rack has its own dedicated auto gain feature. Here we have a chain of 5 plugins that are being controlled by the State Bridge. And looking at the input and output waveforms, we can see a volume difference of about 10 dB. So let's auto match the output of this rack with its input. Auto match comes in 3 flavors: peak, RMS and LUFS. Let's engage playback and click match. This will take a 5-second sample and then boost or attenuate the output volume to match the input. Auto match is a static gain, so it does not react to anything you do after it has been engaged. However, we also have an auto gain, which you can think of like a volume rider. Again, this comes in 3 flavors: fast, RMS and LUFS. Click enable to engage, and the gain will react to whatever you're doing in real time. Each plugin slot also has oversampling. Here we have a distortion on the snare, and here's what it sounds like with oversampling. With our multiband split, we can send the output of each band to each of the 3 racks. To the low band, I'm going to send the mono signal. And to the high band, I'm going to send just the sides. And then in the mid band, I'm going to add this chorus effect. With this kind of setup, we might have mono compatibility issues. So I'm going to set the frequency analyzer to mid-side so we can monitor this. and it looks like there may be some issues with the mid-band. So I'm going to pull down the widen control on the output. InterState and InterState Bridge are available now from Ravine DSP. We have a 7-day free trial available, but for all of you watching this early, I have a special discounted Founders Edition which will be available until the end of August 2026. And if you like what you saw and you're not subscribed already, hit that subscribe button, as of course this was just a brief overview, and I will be doing a lot more in-depth tutorials coming very soon. Stay tuned, and peace.